Last night, we saw the Bucks exiting stage left from the bubble. The Miami Heat advance. Celtics and Raptors. We have the game tonight. 6:30, the coverage starts on 97.3 ESPN. Lakers won last night. But off the court, Billy Donovan and Oklahoma City parted ways, Keith Smith. So immediately, Sixer fans were saying, yes, yes, yes. Ty Lue, Billy Donovan, or is there another guy that you think's a better fit for Philadelphia at this point with all the news and information that's out there?
Yeah, no, I would go for one of those two. And I don't know that Mike Budenholzer is going to be let go, rather, I should say. If he is, I would expect that in the next day or so from Milwaukee, and then that's going to put another shooter in the mix that's got a very good team. And there's a lot of belief, even with all the chatter around the league about Giannis, that he's not going anywhere. So that automatically becomes one of the most desirable jobs out there. But I think, Philadelphia would do well if they could hire Ty Lue or Billy Donovan.
Yeah, I was going to say, Budenholzer was going to be a follow-up question is, what's going on with the Bucks? I mean, if they got to the point they win 60 last year, they were going to go way over 60, it appeared, this year. But 2 years on the job, do they make the decision that he's the Mark Jackson out there?
Yeah, I'm worried that may be the case for him. I think the two playoff flameouts are just so big, and they were really just bad too. They once they went down, they went down and went down hard. And I think, there's a lot of people who are looking at the way things happened, especially this year. They struggled with Orlando mightily. And that was a team that they should have swept them, and the game shouldn't even have been close. The Magic were down so many key players, and then they get into the second round, and Miami really dispatched them with, I don't want to say ease, but let's call it relative ease. They won the series 4-1. The games were fairly close, but yeah, it's tough. And Budenholzer, it's everything we knew from his Hawks days. He was going to build you a fantastic regular season team, a team that had a very strict, dedicated offensive scheme and a strict, dedicated defensive scheme, as well as pretty strict rotations and playing time and all of those things. But when you get into the playoffs, you have to have something else, because when teams can prepare for it 4, 5, 6, 7 times in a 2-week period, they're going to throw looks at you that you're just not ready for. And that's exactly what Miami did, to a lesser extent Orlando.
Let's throw a hypothetical out there. If he is fired, do you think that he would be a better option for the Sixers over Billy Donovan and Tyronn Lue?
No, I don't think so. I think if you're Philadelphia, you saw the Budenholzer system really not look too good already. Brett Brown went to the drop coverage quite a bit. I think Philadelphia would be very similar to what Milwaukee is, where it would be win a whole ton of games in the regular season, but then in the playoffs, they maybe second round, flame out, and those kind of things, just because I just don't think that it's set up for that system to be, have success in the playoffs. So I think he's the kind of guy who he's best suited for a team that's maybe rebuilding and on their way up, and he can get them there. And then you bring in the next coach to kind of take them to the next level. And that's, not a bad spot to be as an NBA coach. You'd rather see it all the way through. I just don't know that he's the guy to do that.
Yeah, real quick. So we were debating this earlier because obviously Giannis is a guy who doesn't shoot all that well, and he has developed his game a whole heck of a lot. Is that because Budenholzer developed him, or is this something that Giannis did on his own and just had the will and want to get better? In other words, if you have Ben Simmons, is Budenholzer the guy that you would like to get your hands on to work with him, or do we not credit Budenholzer for the development in Giannis's game, even though he has a ways to go?
Yeah, it's always a little bit of both with those things. It's primarily on the player. The player has to want it, and the player has to want to get better. There's a lot of time and effort put in without the coaches present, whether that be in the off season or just in the facility by themselves. The other thing is, I don't want to discount the trainers and the coaches beyond the head coach, because the head coach doesn't spend a ton of time in individual skill work with the players. They'll kind of set the groundwork, and then they'll set an assistant coach on them to work with them. Some teams have, they might be, 4 or 5 people who work with a player on various aspects of their game. But, Budenholzer's shown that he can get a lot out of young guys and can get them up. So, I would assume you'd see Simmons and Embiid probably jump up to maybe playing some of their best basketball that they'd ever played. The question is how much of that is sustainable when you really get down to it and you really want to, win when it counts. That's always going to be the question in the back of your mind.
One thing you mentioned, it was, Budenholzer building the team up and then maybe bringing the new guy in to change it for the postseason and for them to have, a new look once they move on from Budenholzer. And I just feel like that's a conversation for a ton of teams in the NBA. Oh, well, they need that extra juice. They need that new coach to come in and really push them over the edge. And it just brings up the conversation of how many coaches are truly in the league that are capable of being that insane difference maker. It just seems it's so rare to have, considering all of these teams they're in a good spot, but they might need that new coach. It just seems like so many teams are in that position, and that just shows how rare it is to really have that guy.
No, you're absolutely right. And more importantly, those guys aren't available for the most part. Those guys are locked up by their teams to contracts and are, probably lifers, or if not, very close to that with the teams they're with. And you would occasionally see, one of them get away or for some reason it goes a little sideways and then they go somewhere else. I think that's kind of the case with Ty Lue. I think, what he brings to the table is he's a pretty good tactician as a coach, but he's also really good with the players. That doesn't mean he's a player's coach that's going to take a lot of crap from them and go easy on them. But he understands because he was a player. He played with great players. He made it to the NBA Finals, both as a player and a coach. So he's a guy who, really knows what it takes, and he's a guy who's very respected by players for that. But for the rest of the names that are on the market, Billy Donovan, maybe he's that guy. He walked into a little bit of a tough situation in Oklahoma City, and then really did a better job with that team. I think as Kevin Durant left, and then obviously with Russell Westbrook leaving than anybody expected. So maybe he's that guy. But you're absolutely right. The best ones, they're already locked up and with teams and probably not going to be available for a long time, if ever.
Speaking of coaching candidates, Spurs assistant Becky Hammon and former Kings head coach Dave Yeager, they're among the coaching candidates for the Indiana job. So there's a lot of teams on the market that need a head coach that the Sixers need to compete with. Speaking of Oklahoma City, there is another report that the Sixers have seriously discussed making a deal for Chris Paul. How realistic is the Thunder's desire, do you think, to move that contract, Chris Paul, knowing that, hey, they made the playoffs and, that he was a huge help in getting them? Or do you think them parting ways is a sign that they're ready to kind of, go back and try to rebuild this thing?
Yeah, it's the second one. I think what you're seeing with the Thunder is they're getting ready to go into kind of tear down phase, and it's going to be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Lou Dort, and all the young guys. I think you're going to see them try to move Chris Paul this summer, probably try to move Steven Adams. Maybe they'll let Danilo Gallinari go, or maybe try to do something via sign and trade with him. They've got a pretty deep war chest of assets ready to go forward, and they're going to keep building that thing up. But I think that was, it's tough from Billy Donovan's side. When you were brought in, you kind of built it back up. Now it's going to come back down. Not a lot of coaches get to build it up, come back down, and then be on the backside to build it back up again. And that usually doesn't go that way. And I think that's why he said, all right, if we're going in a different direction, it's time for me to move on and do something different here. And that's the key. So that opens up that Chris Paul trade. Now for Philadelphia, clearly it'd be a great trade for them. Chris Paul showed he can still play and play at an extremely high level. I'm not as concerned about his contract as I once was. Sure, it's a lot of money, and maybe he's not quite worth that much, but it is what it is. The problem for Philly is they're going to have to send back Harris or Horford. And I don't know why Oklahoma City has any interest in that unless Philadelphia pays significantly to do that by, virtue of sending them a pick or two along with that contract. Because they're going to be, if you're OKC, you're looking at trading Paul as at a minimum, a neutral asset, but ideally as a positive asset in a deal.
Right. That's, we were talking earlier. Okay, yeah, you got to include Al Horford in that deal. What the heck does Oklahoma City want to do with Al Horford? They're getting an extra year.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the same problem with, my mentions were flooded last night with, what about this trade from Milwaukee? And it was, 5 million trades that include Eric Bledsoe and, a whole bunch of other contracts. And you look at it and it's like, I mean, I get it. I get where you're coming from, but look at it from the other side. What does OKC want with those? That's where I think you might need to loop in a third team. Now, fortunately for them, you've got a couple third teams in there that might be willing to be, players and say, hey, we'll eat the bad deal for you, pay us, a pick or something like that, and we'll do it. We'll be the third party in. Charlotte Hornets, they're going to have some cap space. They've already mentioned, hey, we'll do that. They've got Nick Batum, who's on a big expiring contract, so they could get in there, and that's where it starts to get really interesting. And as an aside, I had, multiple teams tell me over the past couple of weeks, they think this is going to be a very robust trade market, because very few teams have cap space. It's a very uncertain environment where they don't even know that owners are going to want to spend full mid-level exceptions of, $9-10 million per season. So they think that there is a chance what we're going to see this year is, all right, hey, $30 million for $30 million. That doesn't change anything on my payroll, but that's how you start moving money around on the books. And you might see some of these teams that have extra draft picks in this year's draft. They might only keep one or two of them to move them to do something there. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out.
All right, Keith Smith, Yahoo Sports NBA, and, of course, the NBA playoffs continue. Boston and Toronto. He, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline. A lot of info, short amount of time. Thanks so much, man.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I apologize I had to cut it short, but I gotta go do the work.